This video will walk you through the steps as to how to use your graphing calculator to not only graph a quadratic function, but to pull out some key information such as the vertex, your intercepts, and determine if the graph has a maximum or a minimum. So to use your graphing calculator, it doesn't matter if you have an 83 or an 84, graphing calculator will work with all the same button presses to enter stuff in. So for the purposes of this problem here, I'm going to use the equation y equals 1/2 times x plus 1 times x minus 3. Now I'm going to show you how to enter that here in just a second, but ultimately I wanted to give you a frame of reference as to what equation I'm going to end up using. So to enter that into our graphing calculator, since we want to make a graph of that, we are going to go to the top left of the calculator where you'll see the y equals button. We're going to go ahead and press that, and it'll take you to the y menu. If you have anything in any of the slots for y, so y1, y2, etc., use your cursor to scroll up and down and clear each line by hitting the clear button, which you'll see just under the cursor arrows. So everything's clear, we're in good shape. We're going to go ahead and enter this in. So if I happen to have anything with a fraction, to make sure it's entered right, I'm going to put the fraction in parentheses, so you can see how I'm pressing that in. You also, and most of your calculators have that secret fraction menu. You can use that as well, and it'll work out the same way. But again, I'm going to enter this. Now I have the x plus 1 part. The x is located right by the green alpha button. So we're going to use that. And we're going to go ahead and type this in. Make sure when you type this in, you type in what you see on your worksheet or whatever problem you're working with here. Don't lose track of parentheses, because what will happen is your problem will randomly merge together and it'll do all kinds of crazy operations. So the first thing we're going to do here is get a visual of what the graph looks like. To do that, top right of your calculator, you'll see a button that says graph. Hit it, it'll give you a picture. So this will at least give you a general idea as to where your graph should be located on the x and y axes. It'll also kind of give you an idea as if you're doing it right, because your graph should be able to be seen on the screen. If it looks like it's barely on the screen or something looks weird with it, there's a chance you might have typed it in wrong, but your typical graphs will fit on the screen, easily be able to tell where there's a vertex and be able to get some points from it. So to tell, once you have the graph already, you can easily tell if it has a max or a min just by looking at the shape of the graph. In this case, this graph has a min because there's a clear bottom to it and all the points go upward from the bottom of the graph. So to determine how we can plot the graph and get some values here for our intercepts, our vertex, etc., we need to get our table of values. To get our table, we are going to hit second, then graph. Because you'll notice above the word, the graph button, you'll see in some color, maybe it's blue or whatever, it'll say table. To get to that, you do second and graph, it'll pull up a table of values. Depending on what you may have entered last, or if you've entered anything at all, your table may start in a different spot. The table goes on infinitely, so I can scroll up and down forever and get every x value in the world that corresponds with all the different y values. Ultimately, you want to scroll to a point where you've got pairings of x's and y's that you can actually fit on your graph and plot. Because while all the high numbers are great, they're not going to fit. So we need to make sure we scroll and move the table around so that way we have x and y values that we can actually plot. My suggestion would be plot your graph first, because it'll give you a visual, and then it'll probably allow you to answer a lot of different questions from there. So to use your table, though, if we're going just off of that and not actually using the picture of whatever graph that you plot, we can find many pieces of info. The vertex is going to be found by the y value that doesn't repeat. So keep in mind in the parabola, all the y values repeat except for the y value of the vertex, because that's kind of like our centering point, if you will. Right here, what I just circled here at 1, -2, that would be your vertex, because that -2 does not repeat. You'll notice the pattern goes up, so like -1.5, 0, 2.5, etc. Then underneath, 1.5, 0, 2.5, etc. That'll tell you where your vertex is going to be located. Okay, so you can use your table to figure that out. You also have the visual of your graph, and that'll help you with that as well. So right there, that is your vertex. Obviously, your vertex will tell you your axis of symmetry, because we know axis of symmetry is the x value of your vertex, so that's all well and good. The other things that it'll tell you are your x-intercept and your y-intercept. The y-intercept will always be able to be found in your table of values, because in order to have a y-intercept, you must have an x value of 0. So right here, what I just circled, that value is your y-intercept. Because when x is 0, y is negative 1.5. That'll be your y-intercept. It's okay if you have decimals. Doesn't mean you did it wrong. Just some of these graphs, you're going to get decimal points. But your y-intercepts can always be found using your table of values. Sometimes you'll luck out, and your x-intercepts will be in your table of values as well. The way that you're going to know that your x-intercepts are on your table is if you have zeros in the y column. We have that happening in this case at negative 1, 0, 3, 0. We have your x-intercepts located right here. So you don't have to do any math to figure out what the x-intercepts would be. They're right there in your table. And again, that only can happen if you see zeros in the y column. If you do not see zeros in the y column, that doesn't mean you don't necessarily have x-intercepts. It means you need to look at your graph and say, okay, does it cross the x-axis? If it does, you're going to need to do algebra to figure out the x-intercepts, which means plug in 0 for y and work backwards to the problem like we've talked about this chapter. So you'll solve the equation however you need to solve it. If your graph does not cross the x-axis, you'll notice that there's no way that you'll get zeros in the y column of the table because there are no x-intercepts to be had. So that's why it's nice to have the visual of the graph, and you can look at it and say, well, it doesn't cross the x-axis, so there can't be x-intercepts. So you could say that there's none, or technically there would be imaginary x-intercepts because you wouldn't be able to see them on a real graph. So this is how you can use your graphing calculator. It doesn't matter what form your equation's in, standard, vertex, or intercept. You can use your graphing calculator to get all the points you need to plot your graph. And for sure, you can use it to get your vertex, your axis of symmetry, max or min, and your y-intercept. Sometimes it'll give you the x-intercepts. Sometimes you still might have to use algebra to figure those out. But this process will allow you to quickly figure out most of the information that you're going to need to make your graph and identify all the information of a quadratic function.